Bangor, Maine mentioned? This is a banner movie year for us Mainers. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2025 dystopian action thriller, The Running Man. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content, like reviews, rank lists, and recommendations. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and even some tailored film recommendations. So be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. The Running Man stars Glen Powell, Josh Brolin, and Colman Domingo, and was directed by Edgar Wright. Based on Stephen King's 1982 novel of the same name, it tells the dystopian story of a man competing on a deadly game show in order to provide for his family. I know what you're thinking. Don't we already have one of these? We like to think that our complaints regarding the lack of original movies is a relatively new phenomenon, but film repetition has been a thing for more than 100 years. Movies were already getting the remake treatment in the 1910s and 20s. Of course, the prevalence of large franchises has increased in more recent decades, which has led to the modern outcry against remakes, reboots, and legacy sequels, primarily because of their perceived cash grabbiness. While not all franchise editions fall under that classification, many do have that feel to them, so I can understand the frustration. But this is a special case. The 2025 version of The Running Man is not a remake, nor is it a legacy sequel or a reboot. It's a readaptation. Yes, a 1987 movie with the same title exists, and yes, it was based on the same book and features the faintest hint of a similar premise, but really, that movie is its own thing entirely. Many fans of the book, not to mention author Stephen King himself, disliked the 1987 movie, and were disappointed by the extensive changes. So unlike many of the other movies getting the revamped and renewed treatment, The Running Man is one that actually makes sense, providing the opportunity to actually showcase the story that was in the book. This is a day that many people have hoped for nearly 40 years. Unlike the 1987 movie, this 2025 film is a fairly faithful adaptation that sticks remarkably close to the book, right down to its very fitting 2025 release, which matches the setting of the novel. To be fair though, almost anything would have been closer to the book than that previous film version. The dystopian setting and hyper-controlled society are there again, with the government-run network broadcasting a steady stream of nonsense to distract and manipulate the people, including the most popular game show, The Running Man. This time, though, the game mechanics are much more faithful to the book. Runners are poor, down-on-their-luck volunteers who must survive for 30 days to win the grand prize. There's no arena for this show, and instead, they've got the whole real world at their disposal. And rather than cartoonish stalkers dressed as hockey players or light bright boards, runners are tracked by a team of elite killers called hunters. But the general public is in on things too, and can report or even kill them as well. This version of the film features Ben Richards' much more sympathetic and relatable motivation from the book, with him volunteering for the chance to afford medicine for his daughter and provide a better life for his family. Even much of the plot is pulled directly from the book, as he makes his way up to Maine and interacts with a number of specific but quite transient to the story characters. There's still plenty of action, but it's not just an over-the-top campy cheese fest like the last movie. Instead, this film tries to tie everything together, and more prominently incorporates the book's themes into the story. The desperation due to severe class inequity and induced poverty, the government control and pacification through entertainment, the constant manipulation of media to drive a specific narrative and increase ratings. There are still some changes from the book here and there, of course, but this is much more of a satisfying adaptation than the 1987 movie, and one that's actually recognizable this time around. For some movies, the choice of director doesn't make that noticeable of a difference when actually watching the film. But there are some directors that have such a recognizable signature style that there's no way it doesn't factor into their hiring and the expectations of the movie they would produce. And so the announcement of Edgar Wright as the director of this film was extremely exciting. I'm a big fan of his movies and style. I mean, I've been hooked ever since Shaun of the Dead came out, which is still my favorite movie to this day. So I'm obviously always excited for a new Edgar Wright film, but I was especially curious to see the integration of his style into this dystopian Stephen King action thriller. Well, I'm disappointed to say that very little of his signature style comes through. It's there, but it's very subdued, to the point where you probably couldn't guess that this was his film if you didn't already know. His usually entertainingly kinetic editing is reduced to a couple flashy scene transitions. The soundtrack still features a number of songs, but they're not as prominent or tied to the story as usual. Even the script is lackluster. The usual humor feels a bit forced at times. The dialogue is lacking that typical witty, clever sharpness. The silly commercials and fun little Easter eggs, like Schwarzenegger's face on the $100 bill, or Mr. Running Man himself, Tom Cruise, briefly appearing on a TV, feel like additions that Wright had a good time with, but there's not enough of his directorial voice that comes through. It's not bad, it's not a poorly directed movie, it's just not what you'd expect from an Edgar Wright film. It feels diluted and homogenized, closer to any other action movie out there that could have been directed by just about any other director out there. Even putting aside this movie's minimal directorial style, something that'll surely go unnoticed for people unfamiliar with Wright or those who had no clue he was directing this, the film still feels a little lacking. It takes a while to get going, and then when it does, there's some uneven pacing that messes with the flow and momentum. But mostly, this is just a movie that feels like it plays it safe at every turn. The themes are better incorporated here, but it's still not as biting as a dystopian social commentary film should be, and instead often feels like it pulls its punches, though to what end, I don't know. And although it would have been extremely unlikely for Stephen King's original ending to make it to the screen, the third act is surprisingly clunky here, with a series of tacked-on endings that feel more like test screening responses than legitimate creative choices. Despite these shortcomings, The Running Man remains a highly entertaining action thriller. Glen Powell plays a much angrier character than usual, but his charismatic, magnetic charm still shines through, making Benn Richards not only likable, but also extremely easy to root for. There's some real tension and suspense built into the plot, and the story progression is just unpredictable enough to keep the repetition-based boredom at bay. It's a bit more of a generic-feeling action movie than I anticipated, but it's still a satisfying and improved adaptation of King's novel that avoids and corrects for most of the issues I've always had with the previous film. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is how faithful of an adaptation this movie is. I realize this might not be an interesting or relevant pro to anybody viewing the film in a vacuum, away from the book or the 1987 adaptation, but wow, is this satisfyingly close. It sticks to the same basic plot progression as the book, and even features many of the minor characters that Richards encounters and interacts with along the way. Plus, the open-range mechanics of the game show and Richards' motivation for volunteering are restored here, not to mention some actual incorporation of the themes into the story. There are still some changes here and there, of course, and certain elements aren't as well done as in the book, but this avoids being purely action cheese like the previous adaptation, and is instead faithful yet still quite fun. The second pro jumps off from that last point and is how entertaining the movie is. This film could have easily been a dour, dystopian story with a tone closer to that of the book, with its government-controlled storyline. But as both film adaptations have rightfully noted, a tone infused with fun and humor makes for a more palatable movie. This time, though, we've got an extremely charismatic lead whose likability and sympathetic plight make him easy to root for. Plus, we're treated to fun action throughout an interesting story that changes things up just enough to not be pulled down by the plot's inherent repetition. There's still a tiny bit of mostly referential cheesiness, but this movie manages to be entertaining without the outright campiness of the 1987 film. On the con side, the biggest issue is the script. This aspect is usually one of the high points of an Edgar Wright-penned movie, but this time, it's honestly a bit lackluster. It's not terribly written or anything, and is obviously greatly helped by some very solid source material, but it's noticeably underwhelming and flat. Usually, Wright's characters pop with life, and the dialogue is snappy with a certain rhythm to it, but here, everything feels a bit stilted and awkward. The typical clever humor is replaced by too many winking jokes that feel out of sync with the tone of the movie. It all just lacks that usual sharp charm and feels like it could have been written by anybody. The second con is that this film plays it safe. A story like this is meant to be provocative. It's supposed to provide commentary that makes you think about society, and in all likelihood, ruffle some feathers. And this new adaptation does get at the themes of the book a little bit better than the 1987 movie, and even incorporates some things relevant to current events, like the unmasking of a so-called law enforcement officer. But for the most part, part, it really feels like this movie holds back and pulls its punches, rather than being as biting as it should be. Beyond the themes, this movie also feels very safe for an Edgar Wright film. I already mentioned the script in the previous con, but really everything here just feels very diluted for him. His style is still present, but just barely, and it's unlikely that you'd be able to tell that this was his movie without seeing the credit. His usual kinetic editing, the visual humor, the witty dialogue, the prominent music used to drive the plot or character development, it's all so tamped down that it almost feels generic, like it was passed through too many studio executives before it ever got to us. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying The Running Man or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies or anything else. I'm gonna give The Running Man 3.5 out of 5 paws, though it's closer to a 3 than a 4 for me, at least after this first watch. It's a much more faithful adaptation of the book, not only accurately portraying the mechanics of the game show, but also better incorporating the characters and themes. The script is a bit lackluster, and unfortunately very little of Edgar Wright's signature style is present, but it remains an entertaining and mostly satisfying action thriller. I would recommend The Running Man to people looking for a solid action thriller, especially if you're a fan of the novel. Although unlikely to top many people's end-of-the-year lists, this movie still manages to provide some entertainment and timely social commentary in a broadly digestible mainstream package. Those who were disappointed by the 1987 film will likely appreciate this much more faithful to the book adaptation. However, those hoping to see Edgar Wright bring his signature filmmaking style to the project may be left underwhelmed by the more generic action movie style on display here. If you liked The Running Man, I would recommend John Wick Chapter 4. It might seem a bit strange to jump right to the 4th film in a franchise, and I'd of course recommend watching the previous 3 for context, but Chapter 4 is another even more exciting action movie featuring a perpetually on-the-run character with seemingly everybody after him. If you'd like another thematic sci-fi film, you might want to check out In Time. Set in a class-driven dystopic future in which time is the new currency, people stop aging at 25, but are required to have time credits to continue living. With a great premise and so-so execution, this is another on-the-run story about a man trying to reveal the truth and put an end to a corrupt system. And if you want some more Glen Powell and feel like stepping away from sci-fi, you should watch Hitman. Powell is extremely charismatic and charming in this funny and romantic action comedy. Plus, he once again assumes an assortment of fun disguises, as he poses as a fake hitman to entrap people, but finds himself falling for one of the people he's supposed to entrap. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen The Running Man? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie about a character on the run? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.